Okay, so what I'm about to say probably won't bother your average Smash player who prefers wave dashing to art criticism, but there's a long history of gaming being considered a lesser form of art than mediums like literature, film, or TV. Legendary film critic Roger Ebert declared that games can never be art. And fellow critic Jack Kroll said that video games, while fun, can't really express emotional complexity. Now, as a result of being a low-status art, video games have also been deemed unworthy of academic exploration, and game studies is far less prominent on campus than something like film studies. Meanwhile, attempts to situate games in the context of high art have attracted sneers. When the Museum of Modern Art included some video games in its permanent design collection in 2012, The Guardian's art critic clapped back with, "Sorry, MoMA, video games are not art." At the same time, video games are more culturally dominant than ever, bringing in more money than the movie and music industries combined, with a staggering 3 billion people around the world playing along. Let me know in the comments what else you think that at least 3 billion people around the world are doing at any given time. Oh, I know what you're gonna say. Meanwhile, more and more cultural output is based on or adapted from video games. So with video games' popularity and cultural significance ever climbing, we wanted to ask, why have games been so maligned by the culture at large? Can video games achieve the same cultural cachet as other mediums, or could they even do it better?
This pump's sole purpose is to drain the planet dry. While you sleep, while you eat, while you it's here sucking up Mako. It doesn't rest and it doesn't care.
Well, let's find out in today's video on what makes video games different. But before we get into it, we want to shout out Butterfinger for sponsoring this video. To culminate this month's Butterfinger sponsorship, we have a special surprise for this video. So grab a Butterfinger bar, go to gamewithbutterfinger.com and enter your UPC code today for a chance to win the Ultimate Gaming Bundle giveaway. And in the meantime, put on your detective cap, because later on in this episode, you'll get a rare chance to win a prize if you can decode the special cipher and key. Enter your answer at the link in the description to win a code for an exclusive in-game item when Final Fantasy VII Rebirth drops on February 29th. As scholar Daniel Goldberg observes, one reason video games have struggled to earn a place at the big kids' art table is that they've often been engaged with and discussed as products of technology rather than products of culture, which is why most game criticism still tends to read a lot like a review of a mobile phone or a car. Part of this has to do with gaming's deep connection to Cold War era American military funding and technology, which fueled much of early video game development. We're talking games like Hootspiel, a simulation game from 1955 that brought war between NATO and the USSR to life. As a result, video games are viewed as inextricable from the industrial advancements that enabled their birth. More technology than creative work. But this reductive viewpoint doesn't withstand scrutiny in the context of art history. As scholars Jeroen Bergenjon, Gert Vendermeske, and Chris Rutten observe, the technical evolutions have proven to be an important trigger for artistic innovations. They note that when photography first arrived on the scene, it too was not fully recognized as art because of its reliance on new technology. Eventually, photography would greatly expand the bounds of what we consider artistic expression. Another reason video games have been maligned is because they're based around play, which we often associate with the silly and usually unproductive diversions of childhood. But this perspective also looks suspect when you consider that, as sociologist Johan Huizinga noted back in 1938, all art derives from play. The scholar Mary Flanagan elaborates that many influential artistic movements, like Dadaism, Surrealism, and Fluxus, included games in their cultural output. Don't even get me started on improv games, right? You guys want to play a little zip zap zop? Sign up for Patreon and we'll do an improv games session for you over there. While these artistic movements have all been relatively recent, games have been a means for children and adults alike to navigate the conditions of society for just about as long as there have been societies. To make this point, author and game designer Jane McGonigal recounts a fable from ancient writer Herodotus, which describes the society of Lydia 3,000 years ago when it was in the midst of a great famine. Now, starved and feeling helpless, the Lydians began a regimen of alternating between one day spent eating and resting and one day spent not eating and instead engaging in vigorous competitive games. And they did this for 18 years. 18 years of only getting to eat every other day. While many scholars think this story is more a fable than an actual historical account, it still suggests the writer saw serious power in the diversion of gaming, especially in a society experiencing struggle. Viewed this way, gaming's ability to distract from material realities starts to take on serious stakes. And in recent years, as gaming journalism, game studies, and video games themselves have become more sophisticated, the flimsy arguments against considering the medium and art seem increasingly dubious. Today, more than ever, video games are increasingly viewed as legitimate cultural artifacts, capable of communicating aesthetic, narrative, emotional, and ethical meanings.
You will die, forget the dream, and awake under the morning sun. You will be freed from this terrible hunter's dream.
And given their ever-growing popularity, it's no surprise scholars Ellen Sandor and Janine Fraun contend that, for future generations, video games may become the most dynamic extension of cultural memory since photography was embraced as an art form. With this evolution, the way we talk about gaming has also changed. As Daniel Goldberg and Linus Larsson wrote in 2015, the discourse on games is moving into a state of post-escapism. That is, a discourse that looks for meaning beyond entertainment and the joy of play. In other words, if video games were once largely viewed as a way to avoid the real world, post-escapism sees them as inextricable from it. They add, games should be viewed as meaningful tools for understanding the world around us and the interplay between human beings. And increasingly, as gaming occupies more and more cultural real estate, taking the medium seriously isn't just a matter of appreciating art. It's about understanding ourselves and our society. Post-escapism game studies refutes the idea that games occupy a world explicitly demarcated from our own reality. Instead, it embraces the notion that gaming, like all culture, is intertwined with the political environment in which these games are created and played. This comes with major stakes. As Stuart Hall writes, popular culture is one of the sites where this struggle for and against a culture of the powerful is engaged. There's also the stake to be won or lost in that struggle. It is the arena of consent and resistance. It is partly where hegemony arises, and where it is secured. This is why so many governments, authoritarian or not, have suppressed books and films that challenge the status quo. And soon, kids, they'll be coming for your Nintendo Switch. So sleep with one eye open and a gun in your hand. Here, video games stand out again, but for a different reason. Because you could argue that games are even more politically charged than films or books. That's because the interactivity of gaming creates conditions for a phenomenon we rarely experience when consuming art: audience agency. That is, our ability to take action in pursuit of specific goals within the medium, right? This is no matter how much I want to stand up in every horror film screaming, "Girls, why are you going up the stairs? He's going to kill you. When you go upstairs, there's nowhere for you to go unless you want to jump out of the window and you're gonna die," you know? Shout out to the olden days when I would go see movies at the Regal Cinema at the Oviedo Marketplace Mall. And during horror movies, people would just kind of scream and yell things. It was fun. It was chaotic. It was anarchic. But it was my childhood, and I loved it. As philosopher C.T. Nguyen writes, in ordinary practical life, we usually take the means for the sake of the ends. But in games, we can take up an end for the sake of the means. Playing games can be a motivational inversion of ordinary life. As such, he concludes, games are a medium for storing and communicating forms of agency. The demands of ordinary life can limit our day-to-day agency. We can't spend all day designing our dream houses because we have jobs and we don't earn enough to live like The Sims. But gaming is an opportunity to redefine our self-determination. Every game offers its own form of agency. Whether it's Baldur's Gate offering moral agency to choose between fighting Saravok or becoming his new best friend, or the bodily agency we get in Cyberpunk 2077, especially when we use those super jumping legs. Nguyen concludes, just as novels let us experience lives we have not lived, games let us experience forms of agency we might not have discovered on our own. The decisions we make when gaming, even if it's just to f around and do karaoke in Yakuza's version of Tokyo, let us exercise what Nguyen calls a gentle fluidity. This is more than just the ability to play the claw game over and over, as it allows us to rethink the ethical values or big picture goals we subscribe to in real life. It lets us try on new and sometimes even perverse ethical standards, like when we just go ahead and drop a nuclear bomb on a small town. Nguyen believes that trying on new types of agency while gaming can help us feel greater autonomy over our real lives too. Okay, so remember that cipher we mentioned before? Well, it's your big moment. Here's the secret code. If you can crack it, enter your answer at the link in the description to win codes for an exclusive Final Fantasy VII Rebirth item brought to you by Butterfinger. The code is... That's just step one. Stay tuned to find the key you'll need to crack the code. It's a Vignier cipher for the cryptography heads out there, so once you get the key, you'll know what to do. Now, back to the show. Today, the best games let us explore our own agency in a big way. Consider Final Fantasy XIV, an MMO with agency baked into the very conceit via its extensive character creation and narrative structures, which encourages breaking cycles, remaking the world, and forging one's own identity. Now, as the story unfolds, even the range of mechanics creates access to new forms of agency. You're free to buy a house, start a dance club, or create not suitable for work hangouts for you and your freaky friends. And Final Fantasy XIV is hardly the only game in the series to engage with questions about agency. Enter Final Fantasy VII. The most groundbreaking aspect of this game is that instead of the fantastical settings of previous iterations, the story is situated in a world that looks a lot like our own, complete with evil corporations. The difference is that, unlike in your daily life, when despite your moral quandaries, you probably simp for Amazon from time to time, in the game, you actually have the agency to fight against them. It kicks off with you controlling a mercenary named Cloud Strife, as he assists eco-terrorists in sabotaging a facility belonging to the despotic super corporation Shinra, whose projects are killing the planet and destroying lives. The game engages with big ideas about the environment, depicting the Earth as a living being made up of interacting systems. When Barrett says that Mako energy is the lifeblood of the planet, they're not lying. It's the special sauce that keeps all the plants and rivers from drying up.
Mako is the lifeblood of our world. The planet bleeds green like you and me bleed red.
This evokes the framework of deep ecology, which proposes that humans need to rethink their relationship to nature away from systems of extraction and towards an ideology of cohabitation. Throughout Final Fantasy VII, we are confronted by examples of how an exploitative approach to nature has terrible cost. Cost that will only get more dire if our heroes don't stop Shinra's evil plans. This is different from watching a film with similar themes like Avatar, because you're tasked with using your agency to determine the outcome and even reshape the world. These themes pop up again in the Final Fantasy VII Remake, and will presumably show up further in the hotly anticipated Rebirth. But now they look different, and not just in terms of how detailed the dance number is. The remake is interested in many of the same things as the original, but also in the question of adaptation itself, and it expresses this in a way that is only really possible in video games, because it requires you, the player, to interact with it. But you're not ambling through the world unopposed. Throughout the remake, we see funny little ghosts called Whispers, who are referred to as arbiters of fate, and whose purpose is to keep destiny intact.
They are drawn to those who attempt to alter destiny's course and ensure they do not.
What that means, for the sake of the game, is to keep the events of the remake in line with the original Final Fantasy VII. The Whispers mostly pop up when characters are acting in ways new or incompatible with the original game. Their existence implies that the remake takes place in an alternate timeline, something alluded to at other points. While time and alternate realities are fun to ponder, this is also a very clear meta-reference to the process of creating a remake and the dueling pressures to craft something new while staying loyal to the original. This brings us back to agency in a couple of ways. First is the way that the player is taking part in the remake simply by deviating away from fate. By making choices in the game, you are experiencing the distance between the new game and the original. And you're not only witnessing it, you're making it happen. Your button pressing, puzzle solving, and buster sword swinging drive the differences between the new game and the old. But this framework also speaks to the agency of the game's creators, who seem to be loudly asserting their right to make the game they want, even if fans will inevitably yell at them for deviating from the original. Engaging with this multi-layered idea of agency and the way it manifests in games like the Final Fantasy VII Remake and presumably Rebirth shows us that games are a uniquely effective form of art for getting us to not only consider themes, but interact with them. We've seen the potential games have to make us reflect on and rethink our own agency. But it's worth also asking, to what end? Given what we now know about games, it's probably no surprise that throughout history, they've been used both to uphold existing hierarchies and to challenge them. The connection between gaming and the military, for example, is hardly a new phenomenon, as Grieg de Puyter and Nick Dyer Witherford recounts in their book Games of Empire. Philosopher Cicero argued that the sports played by gladiators were essential to building the system of virtues amongst warriors that sustained the Roman Empire, until it didn't, and Prussia's army played war games to rehearse their plans for World War I. In contrast, during the 20th century in the colonial West Indies, the game of cricket became a subversive site for channeling working class resistance against British rule. So how can video games like Final Fantasy help us rethink existing hierarchies? Well, for starters, these games make it clear that the player can and should stand up against the evils of society, or at the very least, question existing hierarchies. Throughout the Final Fantasy franchise, even as early as Final Fantasy IV, the games have featured dubious ruling bodies that deserve resistance or at least greater scrutiny, like the Queen in Final Fantasy IX, whose political plotting and authoritarian impulses seem to cause all your problems. Perhaps more on the nose is Final Fantasy XVI's exploration of slavery and class violence, as well as the way exploitation harms people and the planet. These games take up themes that are critical of the very idea of hierarchy and power. And they don't just tell you to keep an eye out for bad actors. They give you a cool sword and tell you where to point it. You don't just think about fighting back against evil, you press the very buttons that make it happen. Final Fantasy and other series like it understand that by positioning the player as the primary actor in their fantastical stories, the themes of those stories, especially the ones that connect to real life, resonate even harder. This gives games a particular value in a world where we increasingly feel like we can't make meaningful change. Player agency provides us a brief respite from the feeling of powerlessness in the face of evil, and gives us the autonomy to, as our third grade teacher once promised we could, be the change we wish to see in the world. And if it's true that, as Picasso once put it, the purpose of art is washing the dust of daily life off our soul and the way we see it, video games not only qualify but even exemplify the way art helps us transcend the mundane and experience something extraordinary. But what do you all think? Are video games a fun diversion or the most important medium of art being made today? Does player agency actually change the way we feel about our own autonomy? And if so, what are the real-world implications? Let us know what you think in the comments. Thanks so much again to Butterfinger for sponsoring this video. Be sure to grab a Butterfinger bar. Go to gamewithbutterfinger.com and enter your UPC code by the end of the day, today, January 31st, for a chance to win the Ultimate Gaming Bundle giveaway. And remember to enter your answer at the cipher at the link in the description for a chance to win an exclusive in-game item. And don't forget to check out Final Fantasy VII Rebirth when it launches on February 29th. Okay, thanks so much for hanging out for this video. As always, it means a lot to us when you watch, when you click, when you comment. All these sorts of things mean a ton, so keep them up. I thank you for them. Thanks a ton to our patrons as well. Just a reminder, starting in 2024, we're rolling out a bunch of new content that's going to be exclusive to our Patreon, so check out the link in the description and maybe go explore that. It's the best way to support us directly and make us less dependent on, corporations and algorithms, things that you all notoriously love. In the meantime, I'll see you later.